So this is the workshop, Organic Farmers Toolbox, Resilient Farming Practices for Climate Change. My name's Erin Buckwalter, and I'm the Development and Engagement Director at NOFA. I'm going to be the facilitator for this session, and my colleague Alice is here providing tech support. I'd love it if everyone would just take a minute and in your chat box, introduce yourself. You could say your name, where you're at right now, your location, and also how many years you've been at the conference. So if this is your first year or your 39th year, we'd love to hear that. So for those of you who are new to Zoom, I wanted to just share a couple helpful tips. In the bottom of your Zoom page, you'll see a participants button. If you click there, you can rename yourself and add your preferred pronouns. You just hover your mouse over your name and the participants list and right on the right side of the Zoom window and click rename. If you want to be able to see everyone on this call, you can click in the top corner gallery view in the top right corner, or if you want to just see whoever is speaking at that time, you click speaker view. And to mute and unmute yourself, you can click the microphone button in the far left bottom corner of your screen. And we're going to ask everyone to stay muted. And then later on at the end of the workshop, we'll have time for questions and possible unmuting then. Let's see. So we're going to get started just by showing you a quick video. So Alice, if you want to go to the next slide. So this video just provides a really quick overview of NOFA and who we are and what we do. If your internet bandwidth is a little bit slow, you might experience some delays, but it's only 30 seconds and Alice will drop the link to the video in the chat in case you want to watch it later too. Okay, great. So before we get started, I just wanted to take a few minutes to provide a quick introduction to our work. So as you just saw, our mission is to promote organic practices to build an economically viable, ecologically sound, and socially just ag system in Vermont that benefits all living things. And we believe that we all have a role to play in creating a more equitable and resilient food system with joy and vibrant agricultural communities at its heart. At NOFA Vermont, we build programs to serve as bridges from the world we have now towards the world we want. So in our work, we certify the state's organic farms and food processors. We provide farmer services like technical assistance, training, and education for farmers at all stages of their business development. We raise awareness for eaters and community members about how to access and grow good food. We advocate on state and national levels for small and medium scale farmers and farm workers' voices to be heard and supported. We offer a suite of food access programs to ensure that all people in Vermont enjoy organic food. We lead farm to school connections and programming. We build community engagement programs to help develop agricultural awareness and celebration all over Vermont. We travel the state with our mobile pizza oven to build community and share good meals, and we do much, much more. So next, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors. Next slide, Alice, please. Our sponsors are an integral part of the success of our winter conference, and their support is a key ingredient for the growth of our movement. And so we encourage you to learn more about our sponsors on our website and show them some love. And we'll share a link in the chat to find where you can find out more information about these awesome businesses and organizations. We especially want to thank our cultivator, nourisher, nurturer, and grower level sponsors listed here. And again, we just hope you'll visit our website to learn more about them. All of you are integral to our movement at NOFA Vermont too, and we're a membership-based organization, and your membership adds power and voice to our movement. And we hope that if you're not already a member, you'll join us today. So to learn more, Alice will drop a link in the chat and you can find out more about how to join. And here are just some reasons why we think you might want to be involved if you're not already. Lastly, before we get started, we'll go to the next slide and just share some workshop agreements. We sent these to you earlier in the week in your email. And we just want to take a minute. You can read these over. I won't read them out loud, but I think they're helpful for us framing today. And then a few more logistics. If you have any tech-related questions, please drop them in the chat box and we'll work as fast as we can to try and get your questions answered. If something comes up and you need to leave, that's fine. We're going to be recording this workshop, and so you can watch it at a later time, and we'll send them out to all the registrants for the winter conference. And if you have questions during this workshop, if they're kind of clarifying questions or on the specific topic that the speakers are speaking about, you can ask them during like kind of that moment, and you can either raise your hand with the raise your hand function at the bottom where it says reactions. There's a raise your hand option, or you can type them in the chat. And we'll also be leaving about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the workshop for more general question and answers. And you can drop those in the chat too throughout, and we'll be gathering them. And with that, I am so excited for our workshop today, and I have the great honor of welcoming our presenters, Erin Parker and Jono Neiger. And they're going to tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they're up to. So welcome, Jono. Kick us off.
Okay, great. Thanks, Erin, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to queue up my presentation here and get started. So yeah, this is really fun. I'm glad to be here at the Vermont NOFA conference and a lunchtime sharing. So a little background on myself. I live in Western Massachusetts and have a background in biology and ecology, and worked as a field biologist for many years, and did restoration work and as a restoration ecologist in California. Then I sort of changed into more of design and planning, and have a firm called Regenerative Design Group in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And we work in lots of different spheres, but my focus really now is in regenerative agriculture, farm planning, working with landowners and farmers in lots of different settings to develop and promote and help move the regenerative agriculture movement along. I also have a small homestead in Western Massachusetts, my little experimental zone, as well as Big River chestnuts, which I'll be talking about today, which is chestnut agroforestry. Okay, so mostly be talking about Big River chestnuts as an example of different kinds of practices that I think are important for thinking about resilience in farming, resilient practices both on the actual ground and then in communities, and developing resilience for our whole agriculture network and agriculture system in the region. So this is a fairly small property. It's 7 acres, as you can see, on the Connecticut River on a terrace, a floodplain terrace. We're just coming into our 4th growing season this year on leased land. We have the cropping is certified, the nuts and fruit, and primarily the staple that we've got going is chestnuts, and they're planted, you can see, on north-south orientation, and in between the chestnuts are alley cropping of small fruits and rotational chicken grazing, so we'll get into. And so we're just getting ourselves set up and going. The chestnuts are still in establishment. So here you can see getting to somewhere between 5 feet and 8 feet tall, coming out of their tree tubes. Those are protective tubes for deer and rodent pressure. A lot of space in between the trees. These are Chinese and Chinese hybrids. So it's not the American chestnut that we're growing. We're growing hybrid chestnuts for nut production, and they're blight resistant. They're small. They fit within an agricultural setting. They'll get to be 40 feet, maybe 50 feet tall. And there's a lot of diversity with the space in between the trees as they're growing and maturing. There's a lot of space between them. There, you can see here, we've got a lot of ground covers, a lot of the diversity that is from the previous farming activity. It's from the meadow species that have come in between, and it gives a lot of opportunity for the stuff that we're doing in between. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about chestnuts, just to get everybody oriented. These are Chinese and Chinese hybrids. As I said, it's a real opportunity place. We're the only country that can grow chestnuts that doesn't have an industry, a chestnut industry. And thus so much of what is consumed here in the US is imported, 90% or so. There's somewhere around 4,000 acres that are in chestnut production in the US, but this is far below what we would have to have in production to be able to just take care of our own demands, our own supply the chestnut needs of people in the US. So thus there's a huge opportunity for more production to happen. So thinking about resilient planning and what kinds of tools we need to use, we often say, I'm coming from a planning background, I like to have things laid out. I like to look at it from above and see how it's going to work. And on the left is a document that we produce for a SARE grant for carbon sequestration, monitoring and soil testing. So it's showing some of the systems in use and kind of what it looks like in a real generalized way with the alley cropping, silvopasture possibilities, riparian buffer, and productive conservation activities, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And then on the right, a little more detailed view of the plant, the tree sizes, the spacing. We're wanting to lay out and make as many mistakes on paper as beforehand before really going in and putting things on the ground. So I think that it's a key part of this work. And so you could see the tree spacing, two different size circles. The smaller circle is the younger trees at 15-foot diameter, and then the mature tree spacing at 40-foot diameter.
Can I interrupt you really quick, Jono?
Yes.
Someone was just asking about if there's a chestnut hybrid resistant to diseases that's native in the US or North America versus importing species from elsewhere.
No, the American chestnut is subject to the blight. There are chinkapin species and there are chinkapin genetics that are part of the hybridization. So think of it like an agricultural crop, like an apple or a broccoli or a garlic that has been bred and selected over time. So they are not native, so to speak, but they're mixes of European chestnut, Japanese, Chinese. Some have some American genes mixed in, as well as chinkapins.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So really the focus here on the resilience aspect that we're trying to integrate is perennial crops. So the chestnuts as a long-term perennial crops, and then the alleyways with the small fruit is an intermediate term crop. So they're coming into production after year 2. This will be year 3, and we're expecting to have quite a bit of production from elderberry and aronia, and the blackcurrant are a little bit younger. But our focus here was what kinds of perennial crops are easy to grow and have very solid markets, or markets that are in development but feel pretty secure about them. And they fit the conditions of this farmland, which is, I didn't get into that too much. I don't have a lot of time to get into, but it's floodplain terrace with a pretty heavy silt soil. So these crops should do really well there. We're trialing lots of different varieties. I've got another, let's see. I've got another view here of the small fruit with the aronia on the left, 2 rows in between the chestnut rows, and then on the right, the elderberry with the same kind of configuration. Lots of deep mulching of them using wood chips, a lot of different varieties to trial and see how they do. So for the elderberry, for instance, we're growing both the European and the American elderberry that have different growth characteristics and different management characteristics. And so we're trying out lots of varieties to see which ones do well at this particular location. And then we'll use that material, the plants that we're growing, for propagation stock to expand the planting. So in addition to the long-term crop of the chestnuts, the medium-term crop, we've got of the small fruit, we've got the short-term kind of immediate activity of chickens in a rotational grazing system through the alleys as well. And so this is meant to kind of diversify the farm, diversify the crops, and have some different kinds of income streams that can happen successionally. So the chickens are rotating through the different alleys, and you can see their aerial predator protection are the metal covered. Those are on wheels, and they're easily movable by one person. And the pens are set up with electronet fencing, and those cover maybe a 50 by 100 foot area, and they're in there for about 7 to 10 days. And then those penned areas are moved up and down the rows to graze the different areas of the field. So this operation, this part of the operation is being done by a partner farmer, Martin Anderton of Homestead Habitats. So we're, another aspect of this is a kind of a shared farming. And this is also helping with, to keep our lives sane, to create more niches on the farm and uses different niches. So he operates that. He and I interface around what the needs are for the trees and the fruit, as well as for the chickens. And so this is our second year. This 2020 was the second year doing this, and I think it was really successful. We had a really good year. So I'll go through a little bit of our soil management practices. Cover cropping is pretty core to improvements of the soil. We have a field with low fertility, low organic matter, and low soil biology. So a lot of establishment of cover crops and using pretty diversified mixes. So you can see here, we've got 7 or so species in the mix from this last year, and the goal of really amping up the growth within the alleys and getting both nitrogen fixers, deep rooting, pollinator support plants, biomass plants, getting lots of different things happening. Another aspect of of the vegetation management is really using what's growing in the field that was fallow for a number of years. So there's woody regrowth. There's a lot of saplings from floodplain species, box elder, sycamore, sumac, et cetera. And so instead of seeing those as a problem, those are really an opportunity to jumpstart the soil improvements, to let them produce all that biomass. And then we're coming and doing this short rotation coppicing. And you can see that's the tractor running through a bunch of it on the left. And then on the right here, where we've mowed is the woody shredded material from the brush hog that's laid down and starting to jumpstart that soil biology, creating the habitat for fungi and decomposition organisms to start to get the soil biology going. So another view of that kind of pasture management.
I just want to let you know the 5-minute warning.
Oh, good. Perfect. How are we doing here? All right, I'll keep ourselves moving along. So yeah, another view of that mowing and shredding. And this is sort of in advance of the chickens coming through about 1 week before, ideally, so that we're getting the regrowth, sprouting of all the growth that the chickens can work on. So there's a lot of coordination happening. A little bit on the fertigation and fertility management. We are doing soil testing. We're adding different kinds of amendments, biological amendments, and mineral amendments to improve the soil using a spray application system. I now have this set up with a tractor and the trailer. And then on the right is a sprayer that has a boom on the back so we can put out some of these biostimulants. We're using a lot of fish hydrolysate, molasses, micronutrients, kelp, et cetera, to kind of jumpstart the whole biological system. And biological inoculants as well. I'm collecting puffballs from nearby fields, bringing those in. We've got a partner as part of the farm system here. This is Ben Goldberg in the top middle, who does vermicomposting. And so we're using the vermicompost, the worm compost, to bring in soil biology. And then I said that we're doing social inoculation too. We've had some local homeschool groups come out and help spread some of the mycorrhizae inoculant out as well. All right, so I'm going to keep moving through some of the soil management practices. So this is a view of the subsoiling work that we've done. I bought a pretty inexpensive single tine subsoiler, and we're running that through. Here it is running through an area where the chickens were, and they've worked it over pretty well, but it's a good time to come in, break up that compaction with the subsoiler. It allows more water infiltration, and then we come in and sow cover crop afterwards and kind of help to get the whole system going. Here's a view not of Big River chestnuts, because the chestnut field is pretty flat. This is another site I wanted to show you, just an example of another water harvesting, water infiltration method. And many people know swales are a good technique for slowing water running off a slope. And so here on a degraded hillside, this is actually in Maine, and we came through, a bulldozer actually moved the soil, and we shaped it into this berm that's being covered with burlap and then seeded. And so here it is at the end of that season with the cover crop and the seeding established. Here's an overflow where the rocks are, an overflow. And this is slowing the water that's coming down this slope, allowing that water to get into the ground and stimulate the whole system to build that soil and build that activity, biological activity, to start to bring health back to it. All right, last couple of slides. Another aspect of this work I think is really important is knowing what's going on in the field. So we are doing quite a bit of soil testing. Some of it is doesn't necessarily need to go to a laboratory. It's just, what are your observations? What are you seeing? What's the condition of the crops, the plants, the surrounding areas? We're send samples to Logan Labs to do soil chemistry and understanding the soil fertility. We also are working with the NOFA Mass protocol that they've established, their soil health and carbon assessment. And so giving a much broader picture of what's happening than just the fertility test. And we've tried sent samples as well to Cornell through their CASH program. So I think different ways you can get a window into what's going on. Another aspect, I think, of this kind of resilient farming is thinking about these edge zones and where can you incorporate the edges and allow them to be wilder and be places for habitat, for pollinator support. You can see on the photo on the left, this lower left corner here is a wetter portion of the field that we've let just kind of grow out, as well as some of the alleys that are in shrubs and different kinds of growth. And then to the north side of the field at the very bottom of the picture is a developing windbreak edge zone. And in this zone, there's a lot of wild plants happening, but it's also a place where we can do productive conservation, which is we don't have to till it or have a lot of intensive management, but we're incorporating elderberry in here and pawpaw and growing basket willows and different kinds of either niche crops or additional places for crops, but where we're not going to manage it as intensively. So having those places on the farm is really important, I think, and finding where they can be let to go wild or increase their wildness.
Jono,
the last thing is
I just
really
wanted to give you it's been 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Last slide is just a sense of this being a community farm. And I've mentioned some of the other people involved. And so there's these overlapping and shared uses. And I think for resilience and for farms, the more that we can create more niches and have more people involved, the better. All right. And I'm going to stop.
Thanks so much, Jono.
Yeah,
okay,
thank
we're
you.
going to have Aaron join us now. Hi, Aaron.
Excuse me. Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Parker, and I am joining you from occupied Wabanaki territory in so-called Falmouth, Maine. And I'll get my screen share going here. So I run Edgewood Nursery, where I specialize in unusual edible and medicinal plants. And there's some website and contact information there. I'll just give you a quick overview of what sort of stuff I'm up to as a little context. So this is where I live and work. Another view area and a couple more views. On the right, you can see some annually cultivated areas along with the edge of that forest garden area. And then on the left, a lot of potted nursery stock. The products I produce, are potted nursery stock, bare root stock, seeds, I do a few value-added products and some educational services. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about as far as toolkit stuff is what I usually call dead mulch. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I'm sure you know all about the many benefits of mulch, but helps hold soil moisture, minimizes need for irrigation. That was a really big thing last growing season here. In Maine, it was the droughtiest growing season on record. So in over 200 years, this is the least rain we've gotten in our growing season. And a lot of my heavily mulched areas got by without any irrigation at all. And I'm on very gravelly, weak subsoil. So that's a pretty big win for mulch. And before I started using really heavy amounts of mulch, I had a hard time getting almost anything to grow in the soil because it was pretty degraded and there wasn't really much carbon in there to help hold the water. So that's been very helpful for me. Mulch moderates soil temperature. That can be a double-edged sword. Protects soil biology from UV damage, protects soil against compaction, minimizes weed growth, and feeds soil biology and helps build soil carbon. Mulch, one of the costs of mulch is that it has to be collected from your local environment or purchased and then spread. That can be a lot of labor or cost involved. It can provide habitat for some pests and diseases, slows the warming of soil in spring, and chickens love to scratch up mulch, which can be either good or bad. I want to talk a little bit about my personal favorite mulch, which is deciduous tree leaves. It's really, really accessible for some people and not so much for others. If you live anywhere near suburban areas, you probably have pretty amazing access to this type of material. I have a little bit under 1.5 acres in cultivation, and I can very easily get as much leaf material as I could ever possibly use just by hanging a sign at the end of my driveway that says leaves wanted. And landscape management companies are thrilled to dump, you know, as much as I could want. I could get 500 yards of leaf material if I wanted to. A friend of mine just down the road does the same thing, and he gets several hundred yards of leaves to mulch with a year in his mixed vegetable operation that's substantially larger than mine. Leaves really do make an excellent mulch. They have a lot of micronutrient content and counter to some conventional wisdom, they do not cause soil acidification that I'm aware of. I've never heard a documented case of that happening. And I've been mulching heavily with leaves for about 15 years and I haven't had any issues with that. One issue to be aware of though is if the leaves are coming from heavily contaminated sources, they can bioaccumulate some problematic elements such as lead. So you know, just keep that in mind. Spoiled hay makes a great mulch as well. It's great for small gardeners or if you forgot to collect leaves when they were available. And if you're in an area that produces a lot of hay, it's good to know the hay producers because once in a while someone will cut hay and then have weather that causes it to spoil in the field. And that can often be had for a song versus, you know, buying any amount of feed hay. Wood chips, similar to tree leaves. If you're in an area where it's like a suburban environment, they're often a waste material that small arborists and stuff are just happy to get rid of that stuff. So just by hanging a sign or asking around, you can often get a lot of this really wonderful mulch material for free and just dumped at your doorstep. And quick note, the only kind of mulch I don't like is this dyed wood chip mulch for various reasons. All right.
Aaron, can I interrupt really quick?
Yes.
Someone just asked a question about snake worms and saying that they're often spread through mulch. And they're curious if you've had any experiences.
Yeah, that's a newly, that's a pretty new issue for this area. I haven't had any snake worms yet, but I'm on the lookout for that. And I would hope that the way that I'm receiving tree leaves and wood chips would not be a particularly good vector for snakeworms coming to my land, because the leaves are being picked up by mowers, and the wood chips are usually, wood that's getting chipped, and it was a standing tree at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day it's wood chips being dumped by my driveway. But if you were picking up wood chips out of a pile that had been sitting somewhere for a while, I would expect there to be worms and other creatures in there already. So yeah, if that's a concern, and it probably should be for everyone, paying close attention to exactly how the mulch materials are being moved, where they're coming from, how long they've been, in what circumstances they were before you got them, probably makes a huge difference. And stuff that's sort of dry or freshly dropped is going to have a lot less chance of having live worms or worm cocoons or eggs in it than any sort of organic material that's been sitting for a while. Right. So the next thing I want to talk about is integrating perennials into marginal spaces and crop planning. So I work a lot with perennial vegetables, and I think that there is a lot of open niches on mixed vegetable operations and certainly in home gardens where perennial vegetables can be really useful. Some reasons for that is perennials can grow where annuals can't. So heavily damaged soils, partial shade, steep slopes, all are places where it's really hard to grow annual vegetables successfully, but perennials can really thrive in those spaces. They can be a really useful buffer along edges of crop fields or along the edges of garden areas. And perhaps most importantly, perennials produce when annuals aren't, and in season where annuals are stressed. So the sort of prime time for a lot of perennial vegetables is very first thing in the spring, usually from 1 to 6 weeks after the ground thaws is when you're going to get like absolute best production on these things. And that's a time when, unless you've been actively managing them in a hoop house, most annual vegetables are not doing anything. They're just kind of getting established. So it fills a niche in the beginning, and often again with several species at the very end of the annual vegetable season. And an issue that we're really seeing with climate change is not only global warming or just everything getting hotter and hotter, which we are seeing, but also a lot of instability. So that can mean bizarrely late frosts or cold springs or brutally hot patches in the spring, summer, or fall, which can be really stressful on annual crops. But a lot of these perennials can either withstand that or in some circumstances really thrive on those conditions that could be otherwise very adverse. So here's a bunch of perennial vegetables, so walking onions, Good King Henry, lovage are all growing with a apple tree. And for an example of partial shade environments. Here's a perennial border on an annual crop area. You can see some tomatoes in the background, and Good King Henry, marshmallow, Turkish rocket, all along this edge. And in this specific circumstance, I had a lot of problems with quackgrass creeping in from this mowed grass area into the annual cultivation area. And this border not only provides habitat for a lot of beneficial insects and stuff like that, but it also is a really nice living barrier between the weedy mowed grass area and no-till annual cropping areas where I really want to keep the weeds out. And here's a little collage of some of my favorite perennial vegetables, starting from the left on the top row, Good King Henry, common milkweed, Hablitzia, stinging nettle, Turkish rocket, and then bottom row starting at the left, sea kale, Dystania, and mouse garlic. And all of these plants are really resilient and can be grown quite easily in our climate and can really take a beating and still produce very well. All right, so even amongst annually cropping plants, you can enhance the diversity of your farm or garden with a few specific niches that I've noticed over my years growing annuals. Some heirlooms appear to be really exceptionally resilient. And my example of that is the king of the early dry bean. Somehow this bean seems to thrive better than any other in both unusually cool, unusually hot, unusually wet, unusually dry seasons. It's really just amazingly resilient. And while I haven't worked with, a huge variety of annuals, I suspect that there are many others out there that are perhaps not the market favorite, but worth considering adding to your crop planning to make sure that there's something, some variety of each crop that you're working on that's going to thrive in any environmental circumstances that you might come across.
Aaron, I just want to give you've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. I will try and hustle along. Some less common crops like this amaranth, this is Opapio amaranth, can thrive in conditions where more common crop plants don't really. So amaranth can take a huge amount of heat, can take a huge amount of drought, and still produce a really nice leaf crop. And then at the end of the season, you can also get a seed crop as well. And there's lots of sort of minor crops that really deserve our attention, along with all the most common, kale and carrots and all that good stuff. And the last thing that I think I'll have time for is on-farm seed improvement and landrace breeding. And these techniques, I think, are perhaps the most essential part of making annual crops more genetically resilient to climate change, because they keep those crops rapidly adapting to whatever the current conditions are, both in the climate of your region and with your personal growing practices and current soil conditions on your farm. So on-farm seed improvement could be as simple as just saving your own seeds year to year and making selections of existing varieties. So you might grow out the Ailsa Craig onion here, and always save your best onions for seed, growing out your own seed year after year. You're going to get a similar or to same variety, but with improved performance. And then landrace breeding, don't have enough time to get really into it, but what you see here are the parents of a landrace breeding project that I'm currently working on, which is I'm taking all the storage onion genetics I can get my hands on, growing them all out together in the same plot, letting all those genetics mix up, and then growing them out year after year, and only selecting the onions that just did exceptionally well and have good flavor and storage qualities. And so I'm going to wind up with a hodgepodge of different colors, flavors, sizes of onions, but hopefully see real improvement of just how well the plants themselves are performing. And that's something that is a time-honored tradition that goes back to the roots of agriculture, and I think deserves another look from many farmers, just as a way of keeping up with the rapidly changing climate and having genetic stocks that are evolving at the same rate as our climate is changing. And I think that's about all the time I have. So we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, and someone had a question about the name of the dry bean that you showed the picture of.
Oh, yes. That is King of the Early.
King of the Early. Great. Okay, well, so there were a couple questions and I'll share those. And if people have more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. A couple questions for you, Jono. Someone wanted to know how you prepare and apply the puffballs.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty low tech at this point. Pretty much just collecting them and then breaking them up in water and kind of making a slurry, and then kind of sprinkling them out. I've been walking down the rows of trees focused on some, sections of the ground as the trees are getting established, and then just sprinkling the water on the ground. Ideally, for mycorrhizae, we want them to get incorporated down into the soil so that they can get into contact with the roots as soon as possible. We don't want them drying out on the surface. They need to reach a root to activate and grow. So I would try and do it either before rain or before fertigation, or in this sort of late winter. Not this, but in late winter is a good season too, when you're having freeze and thaw and water is moving down through the soil.
Great, thanks, Jono. And another question for you was around if you've had any issues with arsenic concentration by using kelp foliar spray, or if you just haven't had enough time yet to determine. Yeah,
it's a really good question. I think one is that we're using pretty small quantities of kelp. These are for micronutrients. So, and we're getting them through organic kelp sources. So I'm hoping that they're harvesting from clean areas, but I know that the kelp has some arsenic in it. And so it does, it's a good question, and it makes me want to make sure that we're tracking that. So I don't think that we've actually done tests with arsenic in it, but I'll probably do that in the coming year just to kind of know what the levels are early on in the field. That's a good question.
Great, thanks. Erin, a question for you. Someone was saying that they had just started experimenting with leaf mulch and they're interested. I guess maybe it was just a statement. They're interested in how it works out, but I don't know if you want to say anything more about leaf mulch. It seems like that was an interesting thing for folks.
Yeah, I have been using it for a long time and had great results. I don't know how this got started, but it has kind of a bad name in the conventional wisdom of like, oh, tree leaves are too high in carbon, and they acidify the soil. And I haven't found any of that to be true. I have annual beds that, after an initial amendment of compost, I've basically just put leaf mulch on them and had excellent results for several years without needing to add much of anything else. So they're a wonderful material.
Yeah, great.
Can I add in on leaf mulch that folks might look? I think it's a great thing to use for mulch, and I've used tons of leaves in lots of different settings. And there's also a method for shredding up the leaves and inoculating them with fungi, or just using what the fungi spores that are in them and using it as a peat alternative in potting mixes. So I think it's good to find some peat alternatives, which is not a good material to be using. And we've got lots of leaves.
That's a great tip, Jono. And I did want to say one other thing about leaf mulch. It just popped into my head, which is a lot of people say you have to shred up the leaves in order for them to be useful mulch. I have not found that to be true. If you put on a thick layer of whole leaves, they do tend to mat up, which can be good or bad depending on what you want. You're not going to necessarily smother the soil with that, but it's something to be considerate of. And if you've got delicate plants trying to come up through that, they're not going to make it. But it does have an improved weed suppression effect. The other problem with whole leaves is they tend to blow away. So you can put on a nice thick layer of nice dry fall leaves, and then 2 days later it gets kind of windy and they all blow away. So I do like to, if I'm putting down whole dry leaves as mulch, put something on top of them to keep them in place. And for me, that's usually just a sprinkle of wood chips. So I'll take a mulch fork and just kind of shake it as I move it over the mulched area. And, just a very, very light layer of wood chips will keep them in place. But other materials that you want to add anyway can do a great job. So if you live near the coast, you can use whole seaweed. And if you want to use some stone dust as a mineral or micronutrient amendment, both of those materials will help keep the leaves in place long enough for them to get kind of wet, and for the mycorrhizae that's in the soil to kind of grab onto them. And once the mycelium gets into them and they get kind of wet, they tend to not blow away anymore.
Great. And someone wanted to know when you get the leaves delivered usually, Aaron. Just all fall?
Yep, just in the fall. And the past couple years, it's really been like a single week in the fall. And then I'll have probably 50 or 60 yards of leaves, and I have to take down the sign and put up a new sign that says, sorry, I can't accept any more leaves.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so we have about 1 more minute. So the last question for both of you is, aside from fish emulsion, what other regenerative amendments do you like to use? I don't know if you guys have some favorites you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and put in a plug for human urine. Human urine is really easy to use and apply. It's a lot easier to manage than doing human manure, but it's I use it as my primary source of nitrogen that I'm adding, and I'll water it down between 5 and 10 times and just apply it directly as a side dressing.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see, I mentioned the kelp. A lot of it's what we're doing is trying to get the soil biology boosted so that it can activate the minerals that are in there. There is some mineral balancing that we've done in the field. So adding some calcium, and then also a little bit of sulfur too. So we're bringing in some nutrients just as like in this initial period to try and get the mineral balancing correct. We're bringing in some inoculants as well. So I've gotten some store-bought inoculants like effective microorganisms and some from Tanio as well. So we're trying a lot of different things out and then seeing how it works, and with a focus on micronutrients and soil biology. And I think a lot of the soil biology comes in, and like Garen was mentioning, the leaves. We also we get wood chips from a landscape company that's looking for a place to bring truckloads of wood chips, and then those get stockpiled for 1 to 2 years. And so there's a lot of activation and inoculation with fungi in those piles. So by the time we spread them, it's really bringing a lot of good life back into the soil.
Wow. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. We're so grateful for you being with us today. And this was really an awesome workshop. And I'm so excited that we have it recorded now too, so we can share it with folks that weren't able to be here for this, because so much good knowledge was shared. Before you go, I just want to let you all know we have support for this workshop from the UVM Risk Management Education Center. And Alice is going to drop a few links in the chat with some resources that might be interesting to you all today. And then we'd also really appreciate your feedback on this session. So she's going to drop a link to a quick 5-question evaluation for this workshop. And we hope that you'll take 1 minute to fill it out really quick. And this feedback is really important to us because we really use it to look at what you want in workshops, what you like, what you don't, and try and make things better always for next year. So thank you so much for coming today. And we look forward to seeing you at other conference events over the coming month. Have a great day. Thanks.